Hi, I'm Peter G McDermott. This is G Plus Interviews. And today we have former Fortune 500 CIO Joe Puglisi joining us. Joe, how are you this evening?
Very well, Peter, and very excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Joe, it's absolutely my pleasure. You came recommended by actually quite a number of G Plus users, so we're definitely glad to have you as our third guest here on G Plus Interviews. Each week we will bring you a new person that people are talking about on G Plus Interviews. If you have suggestions for people you'd like to see interviewed on the show, simply head to my website, petergmcdermott.com, click on G Plus Interviews, submit the short application, and I'll be in touch to follow up and see if we can get that guest on the air. So without further ado, here is Joe Puglisi. Joe, good evening. I know you're doing well. I know you wish you had a glass of wine. I'm sorry we didn't afford you the time to do that.
I didn't know. I thought maybe it was a dry show, you know.
Well, we try to have fun here. That's the most important thing. So, Joe, tell me a little bit about your background.
Sure, Peter. As you said, I was a former Fortune 500 CIO. I've actually been involved in technology since my days of high school, if you can believe that, and that was a long time ago.
So, Joe, you were CIO, I believe, at Emcor?
Yes, that's correct. Emcor is a multi-billion-dollar construction and facilities maintenance firm, primarily operating here in the continental United States, providing mechanical and electrical contracting services and building maintenance. I was actually their first CIO, Peter. I was brought in by the president at the beginning of the last decade, and the mission was to network the company, if you can believe that. They were actually not even connected at that time.
So, Joe, what type of technology was being used at that time?
That's a great question, and I'm going to give you the answer, and I don't want everybody out there to pass judgment too quickly. Think about the time frame first. We were a Lotus Notes shop, an IBM Lotus Notes shop. Now, you have to realize it was circa 2000, and at that time, Notes really was the preeminent groupware solution. And as the mission was to bring the companies together and to foster what in those days was termed knowledge management, it really was the best solution, and that's what we put in across the entire company. In fact, it was a global solution.
Very cool. So the way that technology has advanced, just in terms of computer networking, you know, we've gone from token ring into, you know, the different various standards of speeds from 10 megabits per second to 100, and, you know, now to gigabit Ethernet. Do you think it's going to continue to grow to a certain speed, or do you think we're going to hit a point where there's enough throughput and we don't really have to increase the speed for another decade or so?
Well, I've actually written about that in my blog. Moore's Law has to this point held true. Gordon Moore, of course, the founder of Intel, back in the 60s predicted that computing power would double. Actually, he predicted that transistors would double in terms of the volume per space every 2 years. But it effectively meant that computing power would double every 2 years, and in fact, it has. It's been on that straight line growth path and is projected to continue through 2015. But the interesting thing is the IBM labs have come out with chips that will store at the atomic level. So going from 30 nanometers, 32 nanometers, which is about as small as you can make silicon chips, down to circuitry for memory that IBM are playing with, measured by atoms, one atom wide, is potentially 1,000,000 times the density for storage. And there are some labs, I believe it's in New South Wales, where circuitry has been constructed 1 atom wide and 4 atoms high. If you can make a wire that small, you can also make computers go hundreds of thousands of times faster than they go today.
So speaking about the evolution of technology, it's amazing how we have adhered to Moore's Law and, how quickly things are unfortunately outdated by that. But speaking of outdated, Joe, what was your first home computer?
Oh gosh, my first home computer. It was probably something reasonably modern, like a Dell Tower. In the early days of computing, we didn't bring computers home. I mean, I date back, unfortunately, past the advent of the PC, back to the days when you took a portable terminal home. So what you would have seen in my house more frequently than a computer in those days, obviously, was a terminal. They were quite large. Some of the early ones looked like Singer sewing machines, the kind that opened two panels to the side. They were huge. So by the time we had computers in the house, they were probably Dell computers. I think my first one was a Gateway. Now that I recall, my first computer was a Gateway machine.
So thinking back to when you had that Gateway machine, looking forward at what technology was going to look like by now, 2012, what is the most surprising thing? What has developed and come into fruition that you never would have expected back then?
That's a great question, and I think, Peter, to answer that question, so many dimensions of computing and technology have evolved beyond anybody's wildest imagination, that it's hard to even pick one of them. When I bought a computer as recently as 3 or 4 years ago with a gigabyte of memory and with 500 gigabytes of hard drive space, to me it was inconceivable that I would ever run out of room. And yet today, drives half the size, half the cost, are a terabyte in capacity. Probably the voice control would be the one that we all thought would be science fiction longer than it has been. I was very excited when I got my iPhone 4 and I could tell Siri to tell me whether I'd need an umbrella tomorrow, and it could answer that question. I mean, to me, that's pretty cool.
No, absolutely. And for us Android users there, we're stuck with the parody opposite, which is Iris, which gives us nothing more than a sarcastic response to most questions. That, of course, is developing. But, you've told us, what you expected that has come and the coolest thing you've seen. But what did you expect for us to be able to accomplish now through technology that you're disappointed that we haven't gotten to that point yet?
Another interesting question, and I was writing today apropos Martin Luther King's birthday celebration. It seems to me that with the amount of communication, the connectivity, the reduction in the size of the world, I would have hoped that it would have brought more, more connection among the peoples on the planet. I don't want to sound too Pollyanna-ish, but as we get to know each other better and interact more frequently and more readily, as we come to understand one another better, I should hope that would reduce the amount of conflict. And so far, I don't think technology has been used as effectively to bring peace to the world as it has to bring more death and destruction and mayhem.
Well, speaking of the world, we're going to go to a viewer question right now. This comes from Joe Gran. And Joe Gran's question is about bandwidth and how it differs throughout the world. So Joe's question, Joseph, he's wondering what your thoughts are on local infrastructure and internet bandwidth. Can it increase enough to support video content such as Hangouts in areas where bandwidth and connections aren't as rich as they are in the U.S., such as India?
Well, ironically, some of the underdeveloped or lesser developed countries have an advantage. Here in the United States, we had a cellular system before other countries had it, and so we're saddled with older towers and older electronics on those towers. Now, of course, we're seeing the advent of technologies like LTE being rolled out by all the major carriers, and there will be something beyond LTE which will introduce even greater bandwidth and greater reach. Other countries leapfrogged us and started with newer, more modern equipment. I think in the wireless world, you're going to see continued growth in the spectrum, and it is going to be adequate bandwidth for all forms of communication, including video.
So, Joe, what has been one of the biggest challenges? You work with a lot of other companies. I know you do consulting on this side. What are some of the biggest challenges with technology that you're noticing either upstarts or established companies are facing in today's world?
There's a bring your own device to work mindset among the newer workforce. The new generation are coming into the office, bringing their iPads and their iPhones, and expecting to be able to use all of the facilities that they've had at home since the day they learned how to walk and talk and use computers, which these days seems to all happen right around the same time. In the workplace, you know, there's a need for security and for standardization in order to be able to support the systems and the business processes that are going on in a safe and secure and efficient manner. And these things are very much at odds with one another. So today's senior IT management, whether CIO or whatever the title may be, you really have to wrestle with this notion of people bringing their own devices in. How do you allow it? How do you control it? How do you maintain order when you don't have the standards and the control over the devices that you've had in the past?
So as far as that goes then, do you see in the near future the possibility, you know, the iPad is obviously an extremely popular device in homes. However, the business world has been very slow to adopt it. Some bigger companies are starting to adopt it now. But one of the big hoops is how to make that device compatible with their network and to make all of the apps and all the access through that device secure. And I know that's what you're talking about. Now, do you feel in the near future that product manufacturers and software designers are going to have the intention of making these devices plug and play with corporate networks as soon as they hit the shelves? So when people bring these devices into work, ask their IT manager, hey, I just got this. It's going to help me be productive. Can we put it on the network? Do you think that manufacturers are going to cater more towards big business in making these devices more adaptable to secure corporate networks?
Well, first, some of the companies, in fact, research will show that roughly half the companies are allowing to some degree people to bring their own devices to work. So the walls are coming down and people are dealing with the reality that it simply can't be held at bay forever. A lot of companies will provide access to their internal systems in a way that still insulates their system from the device in which it's running. By that I mean, if you think about a browser, you know, the browser is running on your computer, but all of the content that it's acquiring is coming from other places. And if you build it properly, you can encapsulate that application in a way that doesn't permit it to do anything on the local device, nor can anything on the local device find its way back into your corporate systems. So those techniques are being used very effectively. I'll say one other thing about security, Peter, and anyone that thinks they can build a strong enough firewall or enough virus detection or intrusion detection, or they can build the policies or restrict users, at some point, your weakest link is the network between the keyboard and the chair, and that is your employee. If your employees are not well-educated, well-trained, and aware of the dangers, and if they don't act appropriately, they become the weak link in the chain, and you run the risk of being compromised.
Now, to your point, talking about the distance between the keyboard and the chair, a big concern for the public now is when using public and work terminals, whether or not their login credentials are being captured from either keyboard loggers or software embedded on computers. As reported by Lifehacker and several other blogs today, Google has taken a step forward, innovating QR codes into your account logon, now being able to use your smartphone to snap an auto-generated QR code and then log in on your cell phone device instead of the computer terminal you're sitting at. Do you think we're going to see an increase in the different opportunities for logging into different environments and eventually see the common password fade away, as it is a very vulnerable security feature?
Absolutely. There are so many multi-authentication technologies. You know, there's two-factor and three-factor authentication standards, or approaches, I should say, that are very effective, have been very effective for years. You know, sometimes you have to present a physical key that goes into the USB port in your machine and has a timer on it that matches the target system that you're communicating with. I think the QR code is a very, very innovative and very creative solution to a thorny problem, and I applaud them. I haven't tried it, but I did read about it, and I'm anxious to try it because it's very clever. There will be lots of other technologies. You know, facial recognition is now maturing. Voice recognition is another possibility, and we've had fingerprints on devices for a number of years. So there'll be a lot of innovation around this space, I think, for the years to come.
No, that's definitely forward thinking, and you know, it's amazing how much this stuff has moved forward. You know, since you've started your career, obviously, I'm sure you're amazed as well. But hey, I want to thank you for taking the time to answer my questions. But now comes the fun part. We're about to step into part 2 of Google Plus interviews, where we're going to invite you into the Hangout to ask Joe the questions yourself. So stay tuned. We're going to go ahead and invite all of my extended circles, and you'll have your chance to ask Joseph questions of your own. Stay tuned. I'm Peter G McDermott. If you're watching on YouTube, click to watch part 2. All right, Joseph, we're going to go ahead and invite everybody else and make this interactive, so you and I aren't just two talking heads the whole time. I know your head's fun to watch when it's talking. Mine, not so much. All right, so if you were watching and you're in my extended circles, you should have an invitation to the Hangout. Go ahead and click the blue button to join the Hangout. I promise you, as soon as you join and start interacting with Joe, I will shut my big mouth.
Well, as a small encouragement to the viewers, Peter, I'll tell you that they can ask me questions about mainframes, mini computers, mid-range machines, PCs, local area networks, and the Internet, since I lived through the evolution of computing in all of those phases.
Well, I know Seth wants to join us, so let's make sure we get Seth in here. And let's also see if we can get a couple others. Is there anyone in particular you wanted to invite, Joseph?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I guess we'll run down the list. It's probably too late for Bruce Garber. He's probably asleep.
Oh, it's only 9:02. We can invite Bruce. Let's see who else we can get in here. Let's get Dan McDermott in here. Let's see if he's busy. Come on, people on the interwebs, don't be shy. There's only about 4 million people watching live right now, waiting for you to join the Hangouts.
I've scared them off. I'm too techie, right?
I don't know. We can start doing some... we can do some fun questions here. You know, I think you jinxed us, Joseph. If you're watching live, right before we started doing the show, I was having the pre-show with Joseph, and before we clicked the go to public, you would not believe what Joseph said. Joseph said, gee, I sure hope when you click invite people that... There we go. Daniel Eli Rankin has joined us just in the nick of time. Daniel, good afternoon. Good evening. Joe Grand is joining us now. This is that 2-minute delay, I guess we have. Joe, good evening. How are you?
Good. How are you doing, Peter?
Good. Did you have a question for Joseph?
Yes, I did. I was curious about your thoughts on kind of the changes that have taken place in the software development world, where developers used to be more, used to program more at a rudimentary level when working with computers, used to work with more granular programming languages and at a more root level. And now a lot of the development is shifting in many areas to where you have to know how to drive these integrated development environments, where you can drag and drop and pull things together, and you don't really have to know a lot about the guts behind the scenes. And that's great for being able to produce a lot of things, but it also doesn't help in terms of having, the technical people that understand what's going on behind the scenes. And so Is that change going to result to where it's going to be a challenge to have people who understand how that technology behind the scenes works? Because we'll get kind of dumbed down, for lack of a better term, by the IDE?
That's a great question, and one that I definitely have a point of view on. I've expressed this to a number of people over the years. I liken it to the race car driver today who doesn't really understand anything about the mechanics under the hood or the suspension of the car. So when something doesn't feel quite right, they don't know how to deal with it. They don't know where to look. When I was programming, which was a very long time ago, you started understanding computers from the standpoint of the circuitry, the half adder, assembly language, and some of the earlier, more rudimentary programming languages. When you get to state-driven visual programming, it's a little more about designing the screen and a little less about understanding how memory is being used or how the processor is going to be consumed by the logic that you're developing. So, to your point, you get to be a little out of touch with the reality of the underlying machine, and then things don't run quite as well. And then when they don't work, you don't know how to fix them. Now, I don't want to suggest that there aren't smart programmers out there or that there aren't people still writing in assembly and developing the languages that other people use to develop, because there are, and there are some very bright people out there doing some very good work. But I share your concern, and I've shared that concern with others, that people coming out of schools today don't know enough about the fundamentals, haven't lived through the evolution of computing, and so they view it in a very different way and do lack a deep understanding. Did that answer your question?
Joe, we have you muted. If you go ahead and unmute yourself, we were getting a little bit of feedback from you.
Nope, not yet.
And it looks like Joe has muted his video here in a rapid attempt to get himself unmuted. Daniel, did you have any questions?
Yeah, I actually just ran across from your post today, so I had been reading his profile and everything. And the thing that got me was you mentioned big data analysis. Can you kind of unpack that just a little bit?
Yes, there are a number of current trends in the IT world. Mobile computing, cloud computing, social networks, of course, and big data. Big data refers to the analysis of very large amounts of unstructured data. We have a lot of tools, a lot of software tools and techniques around relational databases and other record-oriented databases, older type of data, where everything is very well defined. The fields, the schema, if you will, is a well-known definition, and then the content within the schema is readily analyzed because you know what's in each bucket. When you start to look at two things, one, the volume of transactions that come across in, say, a credit card or banking activities, it's more data than you could analyze in the past. I mean, it takes a tremendous amount of horsepower, memory, storage, and you have to be clever about how you do it. So there are new tools being developed that can handle large quantities of data, and there are tools like Hadoop, which is specifically oriented toward housing and facilitating the analysis of unstructured or soft information, such as the data you find in an environment like Facebook. Does that help, Dan?
Yeah. Analysis. I'm not sure if I'm frozen. Analysis of databases and information has always been interesting to me. And so you're talking about kind of maybe Twitter could be one such resource that you would data mine.
Absolutely. Twitter is a great example of huge amounts of data that have very rich information if only you can find it.
Right.
And that's the challenge, is how do I swim in this ocean of data and make sense out of it when there's no organization to it. You know, when you look at that 140-character tweet, there's nothing that says the first 10 characters have to be the guy's name, or, you know, columns 30 to 45 have to be a dollar amount. It's just a string of characters that you have to take apart and try to decipher and make some sense of.
Yeah, it's not common to eliminate. Yeah, that's definitely something that there's a lot of power in, and it's really interesting as to how that works. You know, how that could be abused even. You know, with the amount of information coming publicly off my Google Plus. So it's something for the user to be concerned about.
Yeah, privacy
out about themselves.
Privacy is something that one should always be concerned about. And going back to my views in my blog, View from the Bridge, I've expressed a very strong feeling about keeping information private. If there's something that you don't want anyone to know, don't publish it. There really is no 100% secure way of putting any information out anywhere, because as we were saying earlier, you know, your weakest link is people, and I can pretty much come up with an example of defeating almost any mechanism for protecting your data. If you don't want someone to know something, or you don't want anyone to ever see this photo, don't post it anywhere. You know, keep it off the net.
You know, Joseph, and that brings up an interesting point. There was a thread that I shared earlier this week that developed, I'm not going to point anybody's name out, from a fairly notorious photographer talking about hashtagging and sharing photos, and we got into a little bit of a debate about copyright law. And I'm not sure how familiar you are with that in terms of social media, but I guess what's happening now on the legal side is there's really no case law to back up this whole concept of sharing. It used to be before, you know, if you shared a hyperlink going to somebody's website, it was actually proven in tickets.com versus Ticketmaster, I believe, that the hyperlink that you're sharing is actually a matter of fact, and that you are allowed to share that because you're only pointing back to another resource. What's also been found is that by embedding content, it's actually just like hosting a hyperlink. You're not actually taking any possession of that information. So in relation to not wanting to upload anything if you don't want to have it shared, are there any precautions for people that do want to put information out there that want to make sure that other people aren't allowed to share it with others?
Well, as I said, Peter, if you put it out there, you can put restrictions around it. You know, in the context of a Facebook, you can set it so that only your friends can see it. Or you can set it so that only one individual can see it. But at the end of the day, if that one individual does a screenshot and a cut and paste and puts it into another piece of software and then puts it out in their account public, you know, they've exposed it. From a legal standpoint, the only advice that I've gotten from counsel on this that I'll share, I'm not a legal expert, so I won't pretend to be, but the advice that I did get from counsel was the person who took the photograph owns it and owns the rights to it. And so if you take anyone else's photograph and use it for any purpose, any commercial purpose, you should obtain written permission. Otherwise, they do have a legitimate grievance against you.
Now, Seth Goldstein, who's a marketing specialist, is just joining us. Seth, I believe, is watching the live broadcast. Seth, do you have questions for Joseph?
No, I'm just a big fan of Joe. He knows that. You know, we hang out in the hangouts that KOMU do. So I saw that you were interviewing him, so I thought I'd pop in and say hello. Hello.
Hello, Seth. Always a pleasure to see you, my friend.
Yes, always a pleasure, and I'm glad to always see Daniel.
Hey.
So.
See, Joseph, you're already becoming popular the whole way around the.
Oh, Joe's popular.
Absolutely. Well, Joseph, a couple more questions for you. Somebody in the comment stream wanted to know if you ever had a PDP-11.
Well, I've dated myself, so it would have been a possibility, but the answer is no. I did not work with a PDP-11, although I did work with a VAX 11780.
Wow.
The Prime 400 series, and the IBM mid-range machine. I even did a sysgen on the operating system, so there you go.
All right, and another question we had from the audience during the Live On Air Hangout before we invited these fine gentlemen in was whether or not you plan on participating in the New York City Hurl or Hangout in Real Life that will be taking place very shortly.
Well, I am a native New Yorker, born and raised in Brooklyn. I live north and west of the city in the suburbs, but I'm only 45 minutes from Midtown, and you couldn't keep me away from that hurl with a team of horses. I'm very, very much looking forward to meeting some of the people in person that I've met here in Hangouts. I'm dying to hear Daria sing in person. I was just in touch with her this afternoon to let her know that I'm looking forward to meeting her, and she acknowledged it. Bruce Garber, I mentioned earlier, Peter is a good friend, and he's up in Boston. We've never actually shaken hands, and I'm really looking forward to doing that with my good friend Bruce. He is going to come down for the hurl, he tells me, and he needed a place to stay. I offered my spare bedroom, so he might even stay here.
Well, excellent, excellent. I know a lot of people will be looking forward to the opportunity to finally meet you there in New York. You can certainly find more information on that. We'll include it in the post with the video. Joe, you talked a little bit earlier about your blog, View from the Bridge. Do you want to tell us a little bit about it?
Yes, I would love to. I resolved in July, it was early in July, that I would stop only answering other people's questions and contributing to other people's content on the internet. Not that it's a bad thing to do, but I thought some of my own ideas to express, some of my own experiences to share, and so I decided that I would write a daily tech blog Monday through Friday, and I have held fast to that. I am rather proud to say that I've written one every day, Monday through Friday, since July. There are some I think it's 127 out there. I skipped Labor Day and Thanksgiving Day. It was the only 2 days I didn't publish a blog. Some of them are short and sweet, and some of them are just opinions. Some of them are product reviews or service reviews. Some of them are a little bit longer and a little bit more detailed. A lot of them about the work we did at Comu, bringing Hangouts to live on-air television broadcast. Much of it is about Google itself and how Google Plus plays off against Facebook, and my opinions on that. A little bit about big data, Dan. I've written a few things about that. And, of course, social networks in general. I'm a Foursquare junkie, use it all the time, so I've written about that.
So, Joseph, no, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's a variety of topics. There's no one thing. I write about whatever strikes me, and sometimes it's what strikes me first thing in the morning that I write about.
So for those looking for your blog, where can we find it, Joseph?
It is at jpuglisi.blogspot.com, or if you find me on Google Plus and go to my profile, there's a link there. If you find me on Twitter, jpuglisi LLC is my Twitter handle, and I tweet out the blog every day. If you happen to be a LinkedIn person, I post to LinkedIn as well, and I put it on Facebook too.
Great. Well, we will have links to all of that on my website and on the post when we go ahead and post these videos sometime tomorrow. Joseph, I really want to take a minute and thank you for your time. Joseph talked a minute about Sarah Hill from KOMU. If you'd like to learn more about the UNews segment on KOMU, you can go to unewsblog.com, where I'm actually working on getting Joseph to help in having some of the content onto that website. unewsblog.com will have links to J Puglisi, LLC.blogspot.com, as well as his Twitter handle, his Google Plus page, LinkedIn page, all that fun stuff. Seth Goldstein, Daniel Eli Rankin, I want to thank both of you gentlemen for being here this evening and taking the time to join us and watch. If you have anyone you'd like to suggest to be our next guest on G Plus Interviews, go to petergmcdermott.com, click on G Plus Interviews, fill out the short form. It'll only take a minute, and who knows, you might see them on the next episode of G Plus Interviews. That's all the time we have for now, but join us next week on G Plus Interviews.